The holiday office party shooting that took place in San Bernardino, California, back on December 2nd, 2015, is being investigated by the FBI as an act of terrorism. Now, if you go to Wired.com, they'll let you know that one of the suspects in this massacre that killed 14 people and wounded 21 others, well, one of the suspects, Tashfeen Malik, well, she supposedly sent a pledge of allegiance to ISIS, the Islamic State, on Facebook shortly after the rampage began. When you go to Russia Today, they'll let you know that crimes against Muslims and mosque attacks have hit an all-time high since the attacks in France and California. Sean Hannity of Fox News asks, have Muslims been the primary targets of hate crimes since the attacks on 9/11? Here's what Sean Hannity has to say on his television show about that.
Well, the FBI actually has statistics on this very issue, and 62.4% of victims of hate speech, you know who they are? They're Jewish Americans. It's only 11.6% that have an anti-Muslim bias. So I don't know exactly what they're referring to, that they're trying to create a controversy where there is none.
Sean Hannity is addressing religious hate crimes in the United States since the attacks on 9/11. Yet he only talks about these FBI figures on hate crimes from 2012. That's only 1 year. 9/11 took place in 2001. Nonetheless, Sean Hannity wants you to know about these 1,340 religious-based hate crimes that took place in the U.S. in 2012. Some 62.4% of the victims of those hate crimes were Jewish victims. They were victims of an offender's anti-Jewish bias. When you do the math on that, it comes out to 836 Jewish victims of hate crimes in 2012. People, that's a high number. I didn't know it was that high. I'm glad these right-wingers are bringing this number up. They're not bringing up this number of Jewish victims of hate crime in the U.S. because they care about Jewish victims of hate crime in the U.S. They're only bringing that number up to diminish the notion of these hate crimes against Muslims. They're trying to minimize it because 11.6%, well, that's a lot less than 62.4%. 11.6% of these victims, well, that comes out to 155 victims. Sean Hannity says only 155 victims because 836 victims were victims of anti-Jewish bias. Nonetheless, when you look at these FBI figures, they're going to let you know that in 2012, the nation's law enforcement agencies reported that there were 7,164 victims of hate crimes in the United States. 7,164. 48.5% of the victims of those crimes were victims targeted because of the offender's bias against race. 19.2% of these victims were targeted because of a bias against a particular sexual orientation. 18.7% of these victims were victimized because of a bias against a religious belief. The biggest group of victims of hate crimes in the United States were victimized because of an offender's bias against race. Racial bias, according to the FBI, victims of racial bias hate crimes, 3,467 victims. 3,467 victims of hate crimes based on racial bias. 66.2% were victims of an offender's anti-black bias. 66.2%. That comes out to 2,295 victims. 2,295 victims. That's the biggest number of victims of hate crimes in the United States. 22% were victims of an offender's anti-white bias. That comes up to 763 victims. So just keep in mind, these right-wingers are not bringing up this number of Jewish victims of hate crime because they care about Jewish victims of hate crimes. They're just trying to minimize the importance of hate crimes against Muslims in the United States. If these right-wingers really cared about these FBI statistics on hate crime victims, these right-wingers would be advocating for black people who are victims of hate crimes.